Hello, my name is Maritza Carter, and at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, in front of 300 guests, my father raised a glass, then called me his fat, useless daughter. They laughed, my family, my blood. They laughed. I stood there silent, the same way I had for years, when they cut me out of photos, ignored my deployments, erased my name from every story they told. But that night, they forgot one thing. I don't need to fight to be seen. I command. And when 4 men stood and said, "She's our commanding officer," the room finally saw me. But ask yourself this: why did it take strangers to tell the truth my own family buried for decades? And what else have they tried to bury? The sun was hanging low when I pulled into the parking lot of the Magnolia Country Club. The light had that warm, syrupy glow only Georgia evenings can manage. Gold seeping through the pine trees, coating the world in nostalgia I hadn't asked for. I turned off the ignition and sat for a second, listening to the faint thump of jazz coming from the ballroom inside. People were already laughing. I adjusted the collar of my simple army green dress, smoothed it down, and reached for the small wrapped box on the passenger seat. The tag said, "To Mom and Dad, Happy 50th." I'd written the message 3 times before I got it right. 50 years together was supposed to mean something sacred. I wanted to believe it still did. When I walked through the glass doors, the air conditioning hit me like a slap. A young woman with a headset and a clipboard looked up, all professional cheer. "Name?" she asked. "Maritza Carter." She scanned her list. Her manicured finger paused halfway down. "You must be with logistics?" I frowned. "Excuse me?" She held up a printed badge with a thin ribbon. "Logistics support. Here you go." For a heartbeat, I didn't move. Then I took it. Years of military protocol taught me not to argue over labels, but something twisted in my chest when she smiled politely and moved on to the next guest. I clipped the badge to my dress, just above my heart. "I've been called many things," I muttered under my breath. Invisible wasn't one of them. The foyer buzzed with small talk. Old friends from town, church ladies in pearls, cousins I hadn't seen since my mother's knee surgery. They floated past me like I was furniture. The name tag did its job. Nobody looked twice. "Maritza!" The voice was sweet, high, and sharp enough to cut glass. Vera, my older sister, glided toward me in a navy cocktail dress, one of those pieces that looked expensive even before she spoke. Her hair was perfect, her smile professional. "Oh, good, you're here," she said brightly. "We could use an extra pair of hands at the welcome table. People keep showing up without RSVPs. I blinked. "You want me to help check people in?" "Just for a bit," she said, like I was being unreasonable. "You're good at organizing. It'll keep things smooth." There were a dozen ways to say no. I knew them all. Instead, I said, "Of course." The words came out smooth, the same way I used to say, "Yes, sir," to commanding officers who didn't remember my name. My stomach turned, but my face stayed calm. Vera gave a satisfied nod. "Perfect. Smile for the guests, okay?" At the check-in table, I sorted name tags while people streamed through the door. Most of them didn't even glance at me. A few said, "Thanks, sweetheart," or "Can we get 2 more programs?" I found myself nodding automatically, as if I were actually staff. Old family friends approached, the McKinneys from down the road. Mrs. McKinney looked at me, squinting. "Is she part of the catering crew?" Vera heard and smirked. "Something like that." She didn't bother to correct them. My mother appeared next, wrapped in a floral shawl, glowing under the ballroom lights. Her perfume hit me before her words did, lilac and something older, sharper. She looked right past me, toward the guests. "Mom?" I said softly. She didn't hear me, or pretended not to. My father followed close behind, one arm around her waist. He gave me the same expression he used when checking a thermostat. Indifferent, mechanical, making sure the temperature was acceptable. Then he looked away. I swallowed hard. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Carter," I whispered to no one. By 7, the foyer thinned. I slipped the badge off and set it under a stack of unused name tags. The thin plastic made a small, tired sound as it hit the table. I needed air. Out on the veranda, fireflies were beginning to flicker in the trees. I leaned against the railing, watching the sky bleed from amber to blue. From inside came bursts of laughter and the hum of a microphone being tested. I'd told myself to expect indifference. I hadn't expected efficiency. My family didn't just ignore me, they had systematized it. In the distance, I could see my reflection in the window, a woman in her 40s with shoulders too square, eyes too alert for a party. I looked like someone who came to fix the generator, not to celebrate love. A waiter passed carrying champagne. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked kindly. "Fine," I said, taking a flute even though I didn't drink. "Just watching the light change." He smiled, uncertain, and moved on. As I sipped the warm bubbles, a memory surfaced. Me at 15, standing in the church hallway after service. Dad had introduced my siblings to the pastor, Peter, the business prodigy, Vera, the bright star bound for law school, and then me. "This is our strong one," he'd said with a chuckle. "Good for lifting." The men laughed. I smiled because that was the rule. Smile, or it gets worse. Now, decades later, I could still feel that same muscle tightening in my face. Some habits are survival tactics dressed as politeness. Inside, the ballroom lights dimmed. A voice called over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Vera Carter will be giving the family welcome." I straightened my dress, ran a hand through my hair, and stepped back toward the door. Vera met me halfway, perfectly poised, microphone in hand. "Smile for the guests," she whispered. Her eyes glinted. "You look sturdy." For a heartbeat, I said nothing. Then I smiled. A slow, deliberate curl of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. "Don't worry," I told her. "I've been standing tall my whole life." Inside, applause began. Vera turned away to bask in it. I followed her in, back into the light, holding the weight of every unsaid word like a medal only I could see. I didn't answer Vera's jab. Instead, I smiled, the kind of polite expression that hides everything a person shouldn't say out loud. She turned away toward the crowd as if she'd never spoken to me, and the microphone hummed to life. I followed her into the ballroom, each step measured, like I was crossing into enemy territory. The room smelled of lilies and champagne. Soft music floated from the corner where a quartet played old love songs my parents used to dance to when I was a kid. I took a seat at the edge of the crowd. Vera's voice carried easily, warm and rehearsed, the kind of voice that made people believe every word. She talked about family values and the foundation our parents built, as if we'd all been standing on equal ground our whole lives. The audience nodded, enchanted. I felt my jaw tighten. She always knew how to own a room, even when the room wasn't hers. Then she smiled that perfect hostess smile and said, "We have a special presentation tonight." She motioned toward a man at the side of the stage. He brought out a large framed portrait, my parents' wedding photo reimagined, engraved in sepia on polished wood. The crowd gasped. It was stunning. I recognized it immediately. I'd spent 6 weeks designing that gift. I'd chosen the artist, selected the photo, and paid extra for the small inscription at the bottom. "Love endures when pride fades." I remembered wrapping it that morning, the paper creased just right, the bow carefully tied. Vera lifted the microphone again. "This beautiful piece was a gift from me and my husband, Desmond." The room filled with applause. My chest went hollow. Desmond's eyes darted to mine, then to the floor. He didn't correct her. My palms itched. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I stayed still, forcing a small smile for the guests who turned toward me and nodded politely, believing the lie. When the clapping died down, I stood. The hem of my dress brushed against my knees. I walked toward Vera as she stepped off the stage, still basking in the glow of admiration. "I thought we agreed I'd present the gift," I said quietly. She blinked like she'd forgotten who I was for a second. "Oh, right. The MC must have mixed things up. Don't be petty, Maritza. It's just a gift." "It's not about the gift." "Then let it go." She was already turning away, scanning the room for her next admirer. Desmond cleared his throat but said nothing. The silence between us said enough. I went back to my table. The portrait sat on display near the cake table, glinting under the chandelier light. My parents were still admiring it, touching the engraved surface like it was a miracle that someone had thought of it. They didn't look my way. The next part of the evening began, a slideshow. The screen flickered and everyone turned toward it. 50 years of love, the announcer said. The first photo, my parents' wedding day, young and shining. Then came the decades, birthdays, school plays, Peter's graduation, Vera's law school award. Every frame screamed legacy. The guests oohed and awed. And then it hit me. I wasn't in them. Not a single one. Halfway through, I caught a glimpse of myself once, barely. A blurry figure in the background at a barbecue, my face half hidden behind my father's shoulder. The next slide cut to Vera in her wedding gown. The audience clapped. Someone near me whispered, "Didn't they have another daughter?" Another voice replied, "I think she left the family years ago." The air seemed to leave my body. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Now, my deployment photos, gone. The picture of me pinning my mother's corsage before Vera's wedding, gone. Every trace of me erased like a smudge wiped from glass. The applause returned as the slideshow ended. I couldn't move. My hands trembled in my lap, resting on the fabric of my dress. They've built a family album where I don't exist, I thought. The crowd rose for dessert, conversation rising again like nothing had happened. I stayed seated. A server offered me coffee. I shook my head. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. Vera floated past, complimenting the decor. She stopped briefly beside me, placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, and said softly, "You did great tonight, keeping calm. I knew you could handle it." I looked up at her. Handle what? She smiled without answering and walked off. My father passed my table a few minutes later, laughing with a group of old friends. He didn't look in my direction. My mother lingered behind him, her eyes skimming across the room. When they landed on me, she gave a quick, polite smile, the kind you give strangers on airplanes. Something inside me fractured so quietly it almost didn't make a sound. I stayed there long after the music shifted to slower songs. I watched people dance, toast, hug, and take pictures that would fill another slideshow someday. When I finally stood, the room had thinned out. The band was packing up. I found a corner near the exit where the light was dim and took a deep breath. The smell of cake and perfume clung to my skin. Then I saw her again. My mother, walking toward me, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. She stopped a foot away and touched my arm lightly. "Thank you for not making a scene, sweetie," she said gently. "You're being very mature." For a moment, I almost laughed. Maturity, that was their favorite word for silence. But I said nothing. I just nodded. She smiled and walked away. As the doors closed behind her, I whispered to the empty room. I didn't make a scene. I was the scene. I walked away from my mother's words before the music started again. Mature. That was what she called it. What they always called it. Maturity was just their polite way of saying, "Don't embarrass us." I kept my chin up as I made my way toward the back doors. The cool night air hit me like an old truth, sharp, bracing, and unwelcome. I found a bench near the parking lot lights and sat down. From inside, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking, the faint scratch of shoes against the dance floor. For a while, I just listened, like a child outside a house where everyone else belonged. As I sat there, my mind slipped back a few weeks earlier. I'd been home for a short visit, trying to help clean the storage room at my parents' house. Mom had said she wanted to make space for new memories. In the dim corner by the old freezer, I'd found a box full of things that smelled faintly of mildew and pine sol, my old high school trophies, report cards, and one frame wrapped in yellowed newspaper. I unwrapped it carefully and found my military commendation for outstanding service and leadership under duress. It was cracked along the corner, and when I lifted it, I saw why. My father had used it as a wedge under the leg of his workshop chair. I stared at it for a long time before carrying it into the kitchen. "Dad," I said, setting it on the table, "this was under your chair." He looked up from his coffee. That thing was never level, he said, completely serious, as if that explained everything. Mom had frowned at me. You know your father doesn't mean anything by it. Maybe not. But meaning wasn't the problem. It was the habit. The ease with which they repurposed my life into their convenience. Now, back at the reception, I took a slow breath and went inside again. The air was thicker, sweeter with the smell of cake and perfume. The crowd had shifted toward the buffet tables, voices rising with compliments about the food. I noticed a handwritten card in front of a large golden brown pot pie. Grandma Vera's chicken pot pie. I froze. That was my recipe. My handwriting even. The curls of the P and the underline beneath pie. I'd made it that morning, stayed up before dawn to prepare it, packed it carefully into the cooler, and dropped it off at the catering entrance before getting dressed. I walked closer. Guests were raving about it. Best thing here, one man said. Vera, you're a legend. Vera waved it off, laughing modestly. Oh, it's just a little family tradition, she said, taking credit like she was accepting an award she forgot she hadn't earned. I stood there long enough to make myself sick. I reached for a small paper plate, served myself a bit, and sat down near the edge of the room. I couldn't eat. The smell alone made my throat tight. I remembered writing that same recipe down in Afghanistan years ago, in a dusty tent. I'd mailed it home to Mom with a note. Use less cream if the weather's hot. She'd written back, saying it reminded her of Sundays before church. That memory had kept me warm through more cold nights than I cared to count. Now, that memory belonged to Vera. Or at least, she'd claimed it loud enough for everyone to believe her. Even my handwriting gets rewritten, I thought. Desmond walked by, carrying a cup of coffee. He hesitated when he saw me. You all right? I gave him a long look. That recipe's mine, I said. My voice was quiet but steady. So was the portrait. So were half the stories they tell about me. He sighed, guilt flickering in his eyes. I know, I didn't want to start something. I nodded slowly. That's what everyone says right before the damage becomes permanent. He didn't reply. He walked away, shoulders slightly hunched, like a man caught between loyalty and conscience. I leaned back in my chair, watching Vera move from guest to guest, all charm and laughter. Her laughter carried easily, that smooth, confident sound that always made people think she was harmless. She's not even afraid I'll speak, I muttered under my breath. Why would she be? I've never given her a reason to. For a long moment, I stared at the half-eaten slice of pie on my plate. Then I pushed it away. The fork clattered against the paper. Across the room, Vera caught my eye and smiled. A triumphant little smirk she probably didn't even realize she was wearing. That was the thing about people like her. They didn't have to gloat. Existence itself was the victory. I looked around at the guests, their laughter, the music, the glow of chandeliers reflecting off crystal glasses. To them, this was a beautiful evening, a celebration of love and legacy. To me, it was a museum of selective memory. I stood up, ready to leave the table, when a waiter approached. He was young, barely 20, holding a tray piled with empty glasses. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, out of breath. "Could you help clear these before dessert?" For a split second, I thought he was joking. Then I saw his eyes, earnest, apologetic. He truly thought I was part of the staff. My hands curled at my sides, but I forced my expression calm. "Of course," I said finally, taking the tray from him. The glasses clinked together softly. As I carried them toward the kitchen, I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some oblivious. Every step sounded like a metronome counting out the rhythm of my silence. When I reached the door, I paused. In the shiny reflection of the glass, I caught my own face, tired but composed, not defeated. I realized then that this was what power looked like in my family, the ability to humiliate without consequence. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I set the tray down carefully, straightened my back, and turned around. The ballroom stretched before me, golden and glittering, full of people who'd never know what it cost to stand quietly in a room that wanted you invisible. I looked once more at Vera, laughing beside our mother, and said softly, just for myself, "Enjoy the spotlight while it's yours." I didn't correct the waiter. I just nodded, passed the tray along to another server near the kitchen door, and turned back toward the ballroom. The crowd was already clapping. Something must have happened on stage while I was gone. The kind of applause that's automatic, not earned. The kind people give because they're told it's time to do so. I slipped back into my chair, half expecting someone to stop me and ask if I was supposed to be there. No one did. A woman sitting nearby handed me a half-finished glass of white wine she didn't want. "Can you take this back, sweetheart?" she asked kindly. I smiled and took it, walked it to the closest tray, and dumped it without saying a word. Desmond saw it happen. I caught his eyes as I sat back down. He looked away. Then came the moment that made something in me break a little more. The MC returned to the mic with a beaming smile, reading from a card. "And now," he said, "a special thank you to the children of the happy couple." Everyone applauded again. First, of course, the ever-glowing Vera and her husband Desmond. Loud cheers, a standing ovation from one table. Then we have Peter, the rock of the family. More applause, a proud nod from my dad. And last, let's not forget Emily, our logistics clerk who helped coordinate tonight's event. Couldn't have done it without her. A polite ripple of clapping. 2 tables clapped slower than the others. Someone murmured, "Who's Emily?" I didn't correct them. I didn't flinch either. I simply stared straight ahead as the sound passed like wind over a grave. I've worn camouflage in war zones. I've climbed into convoys under mortar fire. I've patched wounds, packed bags, and made death notifications. But this room, this moment, was the real invisibility. Not the kind that hides you, the kind that erases you while people are looking straight at you. Vera smiled graciously at the MC, mouthing thank you, as if the credit had always belonged to her. My mother looked right at me and gave a slight nod, lips curled into a delicate smile that said, "You should be grateful you were even mentioned." I thought back to my boot camp graduation years ago. I'd sent the invitation by mail, even called the house to confirm they got it. On the day, I stood in uniform under a sky so blue it felt unreal, scanning the crowd for my father. He didn't come. Instead, I got a card 3 weeks later. It was blank, not even his signature. The memory settled in my chest like a stone. I excused myself and headed toward the dessert table. If I had to keep my mouth shut, I figured I might as well eat something sweet while doing it. That's when I heard it. Eli's voice, my son, calling from across the room. "Mom, can I grab a cupcake?" he asked, waving at me. I nodded, grateful he still used the word. He darted toward the table where the dessert trays were being refreshed. Just as he reached for a cupcake, Vera's youngest daughter, Paige, leaned over and said in a loud, chipper voice, "Give it to Auntie Vera. That's your other mom, right?" Someone nearby laughed. I stood there, frozen, the sugar tongs clenched in my hand. Eli paused mid-reach. "She's just my aunt," he said, eyes wide, confused. But the damage had been done. There it was, my erasure, now handed down to the next generation like it was nothing more than a funny comment from a child. I set the tongs down, walked out the side door, and stood under the open sky. The air had cooled slightly. A breeze tugged gently at the edge of my scarf. From inside, the sounds of music, laughter, and clinking forks continued as if nothing had happened. My name, my rank, my role as a mother, all taken from me in less than a day, not with fists or fire, but with small, public edits that added up to a complete deletion. I let myself breathe for 2 minutes, deeply, quietly, then I went back inside. As I passed Vera on my way to the table, I didn't stop. I just leaned close and said, "You're rewriting me out of this family. If you keep going, I'll make sure you hear my story, whether you want to or not." She turned toward me slowly, her expression calm, measured, rehearsed. She tilted her head just slightly and said with that same sweet, controlled tone she used on reporters and fundraisers, "You won't. You never do." And she walked away. I stood still after Vera's words. "You never do." It landed like a final period at the end of a book I hadn't agreed to close. For a moment, I just looked at her, at the calm she wore like armor. I could have said something, but I didn't. Not yet. I turned, searching for Eli among the crowd. He was near the dessert table again, a frosting stain on his tie, looking as out of place as I felt. I touched his shoulder lightly. "You okay, kiddo?" He nodded. "Yeah, everyone's nice, I guess." "That's what people say right before they start lying to you," I said with a tired smile. He grinned, not fully understanding, and ran off to join the cousins. I took a deep breath and went back into the heart of the ballroom. Dinner had begun. Plates clinked, wine flowed, and the projector flickered back on. "Oh," the MC said cheerfully, "by popular demand, the slideshow one more time." The crowd applauded like this was a treat. I sat down, my hands folded neatly on the tablecloth, my heart steady in that military rhythm I'd never quite lost. The photos rolled again. My parents' wedding, Vera's first prom, Peter's graduation, my parents on vacation in Charleston, every frame carefully chosen, every moment beautifully staged, and then Vera's wedding, slow zooms, laughter frozen in amber light. Even her ex-husband appeared on screen, smiling proudly beside her like he was still part of the story. But me? Nothing. Not one photo. Not the day I was commissioned. Not the deployment ceremony where I'd pinned my hair into a tight bun and promised myself I'd make it home. Not the day I brought Mom flowers after her surgery, or the Christmas I drove 12 hours just to surprise them. I whispered to myself, this isn't forgetfulness. This is curation. They hadn't overlooked me. They had edited me. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened a blank note. The words came fast. If I disappear, it's not because I faded. It's because someone photoshopped me out. I watched the screen glow, then dim, like the thought had nowhere else to live. The slideshow ended to polite applause. People dabbed their eyes, smiling at my parents as if they'd all been part of this long, perfect legacy. I stood up to get some air, but the MC's voice rang again. "All right, folks, let's get the family up here for a picture." The photographer wheeled in lights and backdrops. Everyone gathered near the stage. Vera was in front, naturally. Peter joined, his wife fixing his tie. Their kids lined up neatly like a magazine spread. "Maritza, come on up," the photographer called. I stepped forward, smoothing my dress. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe they'd remembered. Mom's voice stopped me mid-step. "This one's just for the core family, sweetie. We'll get one with you and Eli after." My feet felt heavy. The word core bounced around in my chest, hollow as an empty shell. I stepped back, watched as the flash went off. My father laughed. Vera tilted her chin perfectly toward the light. I looked at them, that glowing picture of unity, and realized I had spent my whole life standing just outside the frame. Desmond moved first. He stepped out of the group, his hands in his pockets. He walked over and stopped beside me. "I don't like this," he said quietly. "You're part of the core," he added. I smiled faintly. "That makes one of us." We stood side by side while the photographer arranged them again. The click of the camera echoed sharp and fast, capturing what the world would later call a family portrait. A woman next to the photographer turned to me. "Would you like to be in this one, ma'am?" she asked kindly. I thought about it. About how many times I'd been told to wait for my turn, to stay quiet until I was invited in, to settle for after. "Not yet," I said finally, voice calm. "Let's see what happens next." She nodded uncertainly and lifted the camera again. The flash went off, capturing their perfect moment once more. But in that split second, I realized something. Being left out didn't hurt as much as it used to. What hurt more was knowing I'd allowed it, again and again, because silence was easier than confrontation. I turned away before the next flash. Desmond followed me, keeping a respectful distance. "You know," he said quietly, "Vera doesn't realize how cruel this looks." I stopped walking. "No," I said. "She does. That's why she does it so well." He sighed, the kind of sigh that came from someone married too long to the wrong person. "You ever think about just not showing up next time?" "I did," I said. Then I remembered. Ghosts don't haunt houses because they love them. They haunt them because they still have something left to say. I walked toward the open doors leading to the veranda. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and wine. Behind me, the crowd laughed again. The photographer called for another pose. From outside, the ballroom looked like a painting, warm, distant, sealed. I saw my reflection in the glass. My face looked older than I remembered, but not weak. There was something steady in it, something unshakable. I knew I wouldn't stay quiet much longer. Not yet, I murmured again, echoing my own words. But soon. The photographer's flash faded, leaving a bright ghost in my vision. People clapped softly, the kind of applause meant to tidy up an awkward moment. I gave the smallest nod to the woman behind the camera and stepped back toward my table. Dinner plates had been cleared, wine glasses refilled. The hum of conversation filled the gaps between violin notes. For a while, nothing happened, until the room shifted. The bell near the stage chimed 3 times. That sound always meant my father wanted the floor. I felt my stomach tighten like it used to before an inspection. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, gripping the mic with one hand and a glass of red wine with the other. His voice was steady, but carried that performative edge he'd perfected over years of Sunday banter. 50 years of love, partnership, and this woman here putting up with me. He gestured to my mother. People laughed politely. He went on, "We've been through ups and downs, but we did it together. We raised 3 wonderful kids, Vera, our shining star, Peter the provider, and—" He paused, eyes scanning the tables until they landed on me. "And this here is our fat, useless daughter, but at least she showed up on time." It hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. The laughter came next, uneven, nervous, but real enough to sting. The kind of laugh people give when cruelty is wrapped in nostalgia. Some chuckled out of habit, some looked at their shoes. I just sat there, frozen, fingers gripping my napkin so tightly I could feel the stitching. Across the room, a waiter appeared beside me carrying a tray of empty glasses. He leaned down, whispering, "Ma'am, could you take these back to the kitchen, please?" I turned toward him slowly, his cheeks flushed when he realized his mistake. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were—" "It's fine," I said softly, taking the tray before he could finish. My hands shook, not from the weight, but from the years. As I set the tray down on a nearby table, I felt myself slip into memory. 9 years old, church parking lot, my father's voice echoing across the gravel. "We're laying off the donuts, right?" he'd said, squeezing my arm. The men laughed. I smiled because that was what good daughters did, laughed when their fathers turned them into punchlines. Now, decades later, the sound of laughter still felt the same, cheap, familiar. I looked at my father. He was waiting for a reaction. I stood up, every head turned. The violinist's bow stilled mid-air. The only sound left was the hum of electricity in the lights. I walked toward him, slow and deliberate, not angry, steady. He squinted as I came closer, still holding the microphone. "Dad," I said, loud enough for the back of the room to hear, "I don't belong in this speech." A few gasps fluttered across the tables. I didn't stop. "But I do belong in this family, whether you like it or not." He blinked, confused, and tried to recover. "It's a joke, kid." "Can't anyone take a—" "I took everything," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It deepened, anchored by the years I'd spent holding myself together. I took the jokes, the silence, the sideways looks. I took it all quietly. Until now. The room fell still. He lowered the mic slowly, eyes darting around, looking for someone to save him. But no one did. Even Vera, usually quick with an elegant deflection, froze in place. My mother looked down at her hands. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one embarrassed. "I served 20 years, I said, still calm. "I carried people through storms, through desert heat, through fear. But I never carried shame, until I came home." Someone coughed. The air in the room thickened. My father tried again. "You're overreacting. Nobody meant anything by it." "That's the problem," I said. "You never mean anything by it. You just do it, over and over." I could feel my pulse in my ears, but my breathing stayed steady. I turned to the crowd, not accusing, just done hiding. When you laugh, you think you're being polite, but you're helping him carve pieces off me, and I'm done volunteering for the dissection. The waiter who'd handed me the tray earlier was frozen near the door. I caught his eye, smiled gently, and whispered, "You're fine, son." Then I looked back at my father. He looked small, something I'd never noticed before. His shoulders slumped slightly, his mouth half open like he was trying to catch the words before they hit the floor. Behind him, the band stopped pretending to play. The MC held still, waiting for a cue that wouldn't come. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their light differently. For a moment, I thought it was over, that the silence would just swallow the whole thing, and I'd sit back down, another uncomfortable family story to file away. But then, from the far end of the room, I heard a man's voice. "Sir?" It was deep, steady, and commanding in a way that felt familiar. My father looked up. 4 men in suits stood from their table, men I hadn't noticed earlier. They didn't move fast. They didn't have to. The way they stood said everything. One of them, broad-shouldered with a faint scar near his temple, spoke again. "She's our commanding officer." The words rolled through the room like thunder on a clear day. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. 3 others straightened beside him, hands clasped in front of them. The crowd turned, their faces a mix of confusion and dawning comprehension. The scarred man continued, calm and deliberate. "Ma'am led us through Kandahar. She got us home. Every one of us standing here owes her our lives. So, sir." He looked at my father. "You might want to rethink your punchlines." My father's face drained of color. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The glass in his hand trembled. Someone in the back whispered, "Commanding officer?" Another voice, older, softer, answered, "Colonel, she's a colonel." The sound swelled. No one clapped. They just stared. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood still, letting the truth fill the silence he'd once used to diminish me. My father cleared his throat, muttering something that didn't make it past the microphone. The MC tried to step forward, but one of the groomsmen, Staff Sergeant Miller, I remembered now, gave a small shake of his head. The message was clear. Let it stand. For a long time, no one moved. Then, somewhere near the dessert table, I heard the faint sound of a glass breaking, a simple, accidental shatter that somehow marked the end of the joke. I turned to my father one last time. "That's enough," I said quietly. "For both of us." He nodded slowly, eyes down. I walked back toward my table. Every step felt heavier and lighter at once. I passed the waiter again, handed him a clean napkin. "For the spill," I said. He whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Behind me, I could hear the 4 men take their seats again, calm as before. The music hadn't started back up. People just sat there, absorbing what they'd witnessed. When I reached Eli's table, he looked at me with something like awe. "Mom," he whispered, "they stood up for you." I brushed a stray hair from his forehead. "No," I said softly. "They stood up for respect." I sat down beside him, folded my hands in my lap, and exhaled slowly. The chandelier light glimmered above like stars finally willing to be seen. The sound hit the air like a crack of thunder. "She's our commanding officer." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Forks stopped mid-air. The laughter that had bubbled moments before died so fast it left a kind of vacuum. Someone whispered, "Did he just say commanding officer?" Another voice answered, "That can't be right." I didn't move, didn't blink. I'd spent 20 years learning how to stand still when the world shook. I just looked toward the 4 men at the far table, my men, my soldiers, and watched them rise in unison. They weren't in dress blues, just regular suits, but their posture gave them away. Back straight, hands still, eyes forward. I felt the weight of the years between us, Kandahar's dust, the sound of rotors, the smell of fuel, the orders shouted over gunfire. We'd seen each other at our worst, and somehow, we were all still standing. The tallest one, Miller, spoke first. His voice carried across the ballroom, deep and even. "Lieutenant Colonel Carter led us through 2 tours in Kandahar," he said. "We're standing here tonight because she stood up for us back then." The next man, Corporal Dotto, nodded. "And we're standing up for her now." The band stopped playing entirely. The violin bow froze mid-note. A glass clinked against a plate somewhere near the back, then silence. Even Vera, perfect Vera, with her steady smile and curated calm, looked uncertain for once. Her mouth opened, then closed again. My father stood frozen near the mic, hands still wrapped around the stem of his wineglass. His face drained of color. I could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes, trying to rewrite what just happened. A young woman near the back, Jennifer, I think, one of Vera's assistants, held up her phone hesitantly. "Is this the video that was left out?" she asked, her voice trembling. Someone said, "What video?" She tapped her screen, and suddenly the speakers filled with the echo of marching boots and the low hum of wind against a flag. The projector, still warm from the earlier slideshow, flickered to life on the back wall. And there I was. Not in a dress or behind a buffet table, but in uniform. Helmet tucked under my arm, boots thick with red dirt. The video cut between clips, me briefing my team before a convoy, laughing with the mechanics near a hangar, helping load supplies into a helicopter, standing at attention as a general pinned a medal to my chest. The room was dead quiet except for the sound of that video and the pulse in my ears. The camera showed me turning to shake Miller's hand, then saluting. In the corner of the frame, someone shouted, "Ma'am got us home!" The image froze there, light from the projector painting the ballroom walls with the dust and sun of Afghanistan. I heard an older woman near the front sniffle. A man whispered, "I had no idea." Someone else muttered, "Why didn't they mention this before?" My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father took a step back, his wine forgotten. I caught his reflection in the glass doors, small, older than I remembered. The video ended. No music followed it, no polite applause, just silence. I walked slowly to the microphone. The floorboards creaked under my heels. No one stopped me. No one dared. When I reached the front, I didn't look at my father or my sister. I looked out at the crowd, the friends, the neighbors, the strangers who'd laughed because that's what polite people do when someone tells a cruel joke. "I didn't come here to be clapped for," I said quietly. My voice didn't need the mic. It carried on its own. "I came here to be counted." I paused. The words hung there, steady. For a long time, I thought respect was something you earned once and kept forever. Turns out, you have to keep earning it, sometimes even from the people who should have given it freely. A few people lowered their heads. One of my aunts dabbed at her eyes. I set the mic back on its stand and stepped away. I didn't wait for a response. The silence behind me was enough. When I turned toward my father, he was still holding the glass, but his hand trembled now. The red wine had left a thin ring on the tablecloth, his only contribution to the evening. He put the glass down slowly, carefully, as if noise might break the spell. He didn't say a word. The soldiers returned to their table quietly. Miller gave me the smallest nod as he sat, a gesture that said everything that didn't need to be spoken. The spell lingered. No one dared to start the music again. Then Vera moved. She rose from her chair, every step measured, every breath controlled. Her smile was tight but intact, the same mask she'd worn since we were kids. She crossed the room toward me. People parted like water around her, waiting to see what she'd do. When she reached me, she leaned close enough that only I could hear her. Her voice was calm, but her jaw clenched with every word. "You didn't have to humiliate us." I met her eyes, steady and unblinking. No one around us breathed. Vera didn't raise her voice. She never had to. "You didn't have to humiliate us," she said again, slow and deliberate, like each word was a thread she was pulling out of her perfectly tailored composure. I looked at her, then at the people behind her, half of them still sitting, half pretending to check their phones, no one quite sure what to do with their hands. "You did that to yourselves," I said evenly. "I simply stepped out of the way." Her mouth twitched, but no sound came. For once, silence didn't belong to her. Guests began filing toward the exits, the rustle of fabric and the soft squeak of shoes filling the gaps between murmurs. Some people nodded at me, quick, awkward acknowledgments of respect. Others avoided my eyes entirely. It was as if I carried a mirror they couldn't bear to look into. My father had disappeared into the back corner of the ballroom. I caught a glimpse of him near the buffet, head bowed, hands in pockets. He didn't speak. He didn't look at me. Absence was his final word. The chandeliers dimmed slightly as staff started clearing the tables. I turned toward the gift table, meaning to collect the small package I'd brought for my parents. That's when I saw it. An envelope, off to the side, half tucked beneath a bouquet. My name was written on the front in my mother's careful, looping handwriting. The paper had yellowed around the edges. I hesitated, looking around. Nobody was paying attention. I slipped it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, creased from being folded too long. My dearest Maritza, I've watched you be left out of photos, stories, and decisions. I let it happen because I was scared to upset the balance. I thought if I kept peace, we'd all be happier. But now I see that silence isn't peace. It's permission. I'm sorry. I should have protected you better. I don't know if I can fix it now, but please know. I see you. Always have. Love, Mom. The ink had faded, smudged in places where her hand must have paused too long. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Not for proof. Not for pity. Just to hold something true in a room that had forgotten what truth felt like. Some truths are worth carrying, I whispered to myself, not displaying. Behind me, the waitstaff moved efficiently, replacing candles with small thank you envelopes placed neatly on each remaining table. My eyes caught the one at my seat, cream paper, gold trim, elegant handwriting. To Eli and family. Family. The word landed heavy. I opened it. Inside, a short note in Vera's cursive. Thank you for helping with the reception. You were such a good sport. That was it. No signature, no acknowledgement. Just the same sterile courtesy you'd write to a stranger who held the door open. I held the card between my fingers for a long moment before slipping it into my clutch. Not worth tearing, not worth keeping either. I looked across the room. Vera was thanking the band, hugging guests goodbye with her signature grace. The mask was back on, smooth, uncracked. I walked over. The room quieted just a bit as I crossed the floor. Conversations faltered. Forks stopped clinking. She turned, sensing me before I spoke. You don't have to say my name anymore, I said. My voice was soft, not bitter. But I will. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on her champagne glass did, a small tremor that only someone watching closely would notice. Then I turned toward the few guests still lingering near the tables, my father's co-workers, old neighbors, the caterer wiping down trays. They all looked up, waiting. I lifted my glass, the one I hadn't touched all night. To clarity, I said. My voice carried easily, steady. To survival, to showing up, even when they hope you wouldn't. No one applauded, but a few nodded. Desmond stood near the door, his face unreadable, but his eyes kind. The soldiers were gone. The echo of their voices lingered in the air like a benediction. Vera didn't answer. She turned back toward the band and said something about packing up. I left the glass on a table, untouched. As I walked toward the exit, the weight of the letter pressed lightly against my chest, like a heartbeat I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I pushed open the ballroom doors, stepping into the humid night. The air outside smelled like grass and the faint sweetness of spilled champagne. The parking lot lights flickered softly. I could hear laughter from a cluster of guests still waiting for their cars, their words muffled by the wind. Desmond followed a few steps behind me. I heard his shoes on the pavement before he spoke. They'll never say it, he said quietly, stopping beside me. But you were the only honest one in that room. I looked up at the dark outline of the trees, their branches moving gently against the sky. Maybe, I said, but honesty doesn't always win you applause. He smiled faintly. Doesn't mean it's not worth saying. I nodded. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. For a moment we stood there, neither of us needing to fill the silence. The night hummed with the sound of cicadas, steady and low, like the pulse of something old and patient. I reached into my pocket and touched the letter again. Count me in or count me out, I said softly to the empty air. But count me truthfully. Then I walked to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels, and drove away without looking back. The morning after the reception, the house felt too quiet. Not empty, just still, like it had paused to catch its breath. I sat on the porch, coffee warming both my palms, the chipped mug older than my son. A blue jay bullied a cardinal off the feeder, feathers flaring and then gone. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because even birds have rules about who gets to be seen. My phone buzzed. I ignored it the first time, then the second. On the third, I set the mug down and looked. It was a message from my cousin Lisa. We hadn't spoken in over 20 years, not since a falling out over a wedding I wasn't invited to, but somehow still got blamed for ruining. Her text said, "You didn't just stand up for you. You stood up for all of us." That was it. No emojis, no follow-up. I stared at it for a long time. Not everyone needs a microphone to be heard. Some just need permission. Later that day, I checked the mailbox. A thin envelope lay among grocery flyers and a dentist appointment reminder. No return address. Inside was a thank you card. The front said, "Gratitude is never wasted." Inside, just one line in Vera's handwriting. "If you ever want to talk, you know where I live." I didn't respond. I didn't rip it up either. I slipped it into the drawer with the rest of the paper things I didn't know what to do with. Old photos, discharge papers, Eli's first drawing of our house with a crooked tree. Sometimes silence isn't forgiveness. It's just the end of a sentence. The messages didn't stop. Desmond texted me a few days later. "Thank you for being the kind of mother I hope my daughters will admire someday." It landed heavier than he probably meant it to. 2 days after that, my niece, Vera's oldest, sent a photo from the reception. A candid, I was mid-toast, glass raised, eyes clear. The caption read, "Hero, no uniform required." It surprised me how much that image undid me. I didn't cry, but I stared at it for a long time, like it was proof I'd actually existed in that room. The following Sunday, I returned to the church where I was once just the strong one, or the helper. The pews hadn't changed. The same stained glass windows spilled warm light across the hardwood floors. Eli fidgeted beside me, whispering questions about the hymns. After the service, I stepped out into the sunshine, shaking hands as people streamed past. Mrs. Tilden, our old neighbor, stopped in front of me, her blue eyes steady. "Heard you stood taller than anyone else in that room," she said, voice like gravel and honey. I didn't answer right away. Then I nodded. I wasn't the only one who needed it. She patted my hand once and walked away. Then I saw him, my father, standing near the steps, talking to a few men from his bowling league. He didn't look at me. He didn't pretend not to see me either. He just didn't interrupt. For him, that was seismic. That night, after Eli went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and unfolded my mother's letter again. I'd read it enough times to memorize the rhythm, but that didn't stop me. I finally placed it in a frame. Not to hang, just to sit, to be visible. A broken thing doesn't stop being real just because no one talks about it. And broken doesn't mean shameful. Sometimes it just means survived. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be smaller, softer, quieter, believing if I caused no trouble, I'd be loved louder. But that's not how it works. To speak your truth in a family that trained you to whisper is a rebellion. To still love them after is a choice. To not need them to love you back is freedom. A few days later, I took out a photo of myself in uniform, taken on the day I was promoted. My posture stiff, my eyes tired but proud. I slipped it into an envelope, addressed it to my father's house. No note. No return address. On the back of the photo, I wrote, "For the family album, just in case you change your mind." I dropped it in the mailbox without ceremony. The red flag raised like a quiet surrender or a dare. I didn't wait for a response. Some things are sent for peace, others are sent for proof. In the weeks that followed, I returned to work, packed Eli's lunches, paid bills, swept the porch. Life doesn't stop when the story shifts. It just finds a new rhythm. But something in me had changed. Not the armor I wore. That had been forged long before this. What changed was this. I stopped waiting to be included, and I stopped apologizing for being seen, because you are not defined by who forgets you. You are defined by how you remember yourself. One evening, I drove past my parents' house on my way back from the grocery store. I didn't plan to stop, but I slowed as I passed. The porch light was on. Maybe they were expecting someone. Maybe it was a timer. Maybe they always left it on. But for a brief second, I let myself believe that light was for me. And then I kept driving. No longer lost, no longer erased, no longer asking for a seat at the table I helped build. Not angry, not broken, just whole. In families, silence can be just as damaging as cruelty. Maritza's story reminds us that being excluded doesn't always happen loudly. It happens in the quiet choices, the missed acknowledgments, the jokes that aren't funny. So, here's the question. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you most clearly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More real, powerful stories are coming your way.